we move into our third week, and the theme, No Other Gods Before Me, the nature of religious and political idolatry. I suppose we could say that human beings are God makers. I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said that God makes man in his own image, and man frequently returns the compliment. It may well be that humans spend a lot of time at God making. And even when religious traditions speak of God in terms of divine revelation, it is nevertheless described in human language, and the divine we speak of is something of a human construct. Can it be anything other? Revelation is our word to make our God construct definitive and ultimately authoritative. But we have no definitive or ultimately authoritative word or words for God. Whatever the word God means or symbolizes, there are no human words, concepts, or experiences that can encapsulate, capture, or possess the infinite mystery. We must try to say something, realizing that what we say is always finite, seriously limited, never literal, and always beyond us. And at their heart, all religious traditions know this. The Christian tradition has said this from its earliest days. The most we know of God is that we don't know. Our biggest problem, I suppose, is that we don't know that we don't know. So humans, in the name of their religion, can engage in God-making that becomes something of an idol. Religions can become idolatry, making gods in their own image. We create stand-in gods, like the Bible itself, or any other holy book. Or instead of an infallible Bible, we create an infallible Pope or a teaching magisterium, and the faithful are to be loyal and obedient to and controlled by our various declared infallibilities. 2,800 years ago, a Hebrew prophet, Micah, suggested that we walk humbly with our God. He was thinking plural when he said that. Whoever or whatever your God, walk humbly. Don't overreach and pretend to know. Don't make your God and your God way of life an idol. Perhaps we make our gods in all kinds of images. The Bible recognizes in every single book, all 96 of them, if we leave out the apocryphal books, every book recognizes that money, possessions, wealth frequently become the human God. Harvey Cox, a professor of divinity at Harvard University, wrote a book in 2016, The Market as God. In a world of growing inequality, a rapidly warming planet, the injustices of global poverty, the market has reached divine status. It comes, Cox says, complete with its own doctrines, prophets, and evangelical zeal to convert the world to its way of life. Perhaps thinking of Micah, Cox asserts that what has eluded the market is humility. Using familiar religious language, Cox suggests that the soul of the market needs saved from its self-divinizing excesses. And he ends his book with these words. It is said that when the Roman Emperor Vespasian lay on his deathbed, he breathed a sigh and said, well, alas, I suppose now I must become a god. No human individual or institution, Cox continues, not even the market, is suited to be a deity. And when the market does not have to be God anymore, it might be a lot happier. No human individual or institution is suited to be a deity. Vespasian was not the first or the last emperor or political leader or political, economic or religious institution to self-divinize. By the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, nationalism, increasingly militant nationalism, became a god. Flags or symbols, hymns or anthems divinized the institutions, even leaders. The ultimate loyalty was to the nation, even to making the ultimate sacrifice of one's life for one's country. And that blood sacrifice was necessary for national redemption. and those who made the supreme sacrifice might die, but their names live forevermore. Eternal life is theirs. The God of nationalism led us into the most bloody and violent century in human history. It was the century of nationalism as God, and this God claimed millions of lives. We dressed it up in religious language. In the Atlantic West, we used Christian vocabulary to describe the God of nationalism and the life and the loyalty it demanded of its adherents. We still use the Christian thought forms to memorialize the blood sacrifices of nationalism and to keep the God we have made alive. As humans, we have the power and will to create images of the deity, to serve our grand aims and mask our craving for dominance and sovereignty. It's Canadian theologian Douglas John Hall put it this way: but these same images turn into idols. Cultures in their upward and high phases fashion for themselves gods that enshrine their collective pride. And history bears witness to the fact that these gods do indeed inspire a people's heroic ventures, conquests, explorations, inventions, wars, sciences, and technologies. But in their decline, and as perhaps its chief contributing factor, societies are expressed by no other factor so much as by their own cultus. Their gods cannot tolerate failure. But as these gods are truly projections of their own bid for preeminence, there can be no critique of almighty divinity that does not return at last to its source and question the humanity that devised it. Now, that last sentence, I think, is telling, and it's critical. The God of the market, the God of nationalism or religious nationalism, cannot be critiqued without questioning the humanity that devised it. We cannot speak of these gods or God without talking about the human. We cannot talk theology, God talk, without talking anthropology. We cannot assess God without assessing the human. And if we have to critique our image of God in the faith community, we need also to critique and deconstruct our anthropology, what it means to be human. In our God making, we are always dealing with theoanthropology. So to question the God of nationalism, religious nationalism, the kind that it was at the heart of the Ulster Covenant and the Easter Proclamation and much of our modern Irish history, means questioning the humanity that devised it. It's about critically questioning ourselves and what we think or imagine it means to be human. In the early part of the 6th century BCE, the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah critiqued the God production of his community of Judah. With vivid metaphors and images, amazing poetic images, he made a devastating critique of their God making. Jeremiah 10, verses 1 to 16, idols are, quote, like scarecrows in a cucumber field. They just stand there. They cannot move and cannot speak. They are a worthless delusion. Now, these people in 587 BCE were not religiously naive, praying to a little or even a big statue or image here or there. It's been said that idolatry is a seduction of trusting in imagined forces that cannot deliver. We are seduced by the imagined forces of nationalism, racism, sectarianism, technologies. None of these give life, security, or generate the truly human love and justice among us. The idols destroy these life-giving forces and values. And then Jeremiah nails it in verse 8 of that chapter. Those, he says, who make them are like them. So are all who trust in them. We become like the gods we make, impotent, ineffective, destructive. We make the gods in our own image and are then, unsurprisingly, like them. We live and behave and shape social and power structures and relationships in the image of the gods we make, our own image. And the source of the gods, the idols, are human. And we need to critically question the humanity that devised them. A brief word before we go to some discussion about prophets challenging idolatry. There is an intense dispute running through the Hebrew Bible and into the Christian Testament. It is a battle between the prophets and the royal center of power. Put another way, there is a battle going on between prophetic consciousness and royal consciousness. Jesus in the prophetic tradition carries on that battle with the temple religious establishment of his day and the all-pervasive Roman imperialism. One of Vespasian's predecessors, Augustus, had been declared a god. Emperor Vespasian had precedent. Indeed, the claim to divinity went as far back in the biblical story to the Egyptian pharaoh. Centuries later, King James I, who introduced the plantation of Ulster and gave the English-speaking world the King James Bible, or the authorized version, shaped a doctrine of the divine right of kings. This was the king's absolute and unquestioned and unquestionable right to rule, authorized by God. That is what the divinization or deifying of the pharaoh and an emperor or the king really meant. It was not a metaphysical idea at all, but a program of action, of absolute political rule, absolute obedience and loyalty. And to resist was to become an enemy and to risk being eliminated. The strong men of today's political world, such as Putin, Erdogan, Orban, and Xi Jinping, taking absolute power and creating lifelong appointments, are in the same kind of succession. Humans are God makers. God making is a serious political and social business because it is about absolute power, total domination, and complete control. And this is why there is such an intense dispute in the Bible between prophetic consciousness and royal consciousness. It is a battle, if you like, between gods, which is a battle between the social and political organization of power and relationships and society. Perhaps we need to stop reading the Bible as a religious book. It will, of course, be read up to 3-4 times in services and liturgies next Sunday, but rarely, if ever, read with a context, certainly not with a social and political context. Whatever the readings, there may well be little of any awareness of that intense dispute going on, or that idolatry is being critiqued. There may even be the worship of idols going on. And from next Monday through to Saturday, we will behave like the gods we have made. In the second part, after our break, we'll look then, critically look at 3 biblical case studies. But for the moment, we can go into our groups and have a good discussion, hopefully, with each other. There are questions that you should have. They'll go on the chat anyway. What does it mean, or maybe Loretta has created her own, who knows, but what does it mean to question the humanity of those that are humanity who devise the gods of nationalism or any other idolatrous ism? And we're always dealing with theoanthropology. Why can we not talk about God without talking about the human? See where that goes. At the end of the first little bit of input, I was suggesting we'd come back and look at 3 biblical case studies, let's call them that. And the first is Solomon and the instrumentalization of God. Now, King Solomon ruled over the kingdom of Israel, and he set about building an empire. The narrative is powerful, and it's told not in admiration, but critically. Solomon has put a social, political, economic, and religious system in place, an arrangement of power that lived on in consciousness and practice way beyond the tax revolts and partition that followed his imperial reign. Now, when he inherited the kingdom from David in 962 BCE, he set about an expansionism that was totally self-serving and had only one aim: to secure his power and a royal dynasty. He married Pharaoh's daughter, and there ought to have been warning signs there. He married a lot more women, and he filled a palace full of concubines, all making powerful political alliances. That was the whole point. This narrative is told in 1 Kings chapters 1 to 11, and it has to be read as biting satire, a spoof, or a send-up of Solomon in all his glory. There was a group of people known as the Deuteronomists who were responsible for a larger part of the Hebrew Bible. There is the book of Deuteronomy itself, providing the basis for a just economic and political society. Now, however these Deuteronomists were, they are on the same page as prophets like Amos and Jeremiah. They are also the minds who write the narrative and the interpreted history of the Hebrew people in Joshua, Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings. All of these books are written from the perspective of Deuteronomy, and that is the perspective of the prophets, those great people who shaped a prophetic consciousness over against royal consciousness. So the 1st Kings narrative is very critical of Solomon. Solomon created an empire of incredible wealth and affluence. He developed an oppressive social policy built on an elitist hierarchy and extracting money and goods from the poor. Building an economy of elitism and a politics of oppression, he inevitably developed a security paranoia, which increased then his military capacity to defend his wealth and his power. Solomon then did what every empire and absolutist power does. He gave his economic, political, and military system theological legitimation. He built a temple, modeled on the temple of the totalizing oppressive system of Canaan, though this was meant to be an even greater temple, because this was about an even greater Canaan. And so the great temple was built and dedicated with huge pomp and ceremony, and with much prayer. Now there is established state religion, controlled by the king, and blessing all of Solomon's predatory economics, his oppressive politics, and his military might. It is an exalted house of God where God will live forever, and so Solomon's dynasty and empire will last forever, longer than a 1,000-year Reich. Solomon has contradicted everything Moses had brought from Sinai. The economics of elite affluence has abandoned the economics of equality. The politics of oppression has wiped out the politics of justice. The radically free and liberating God of the Exodus has been instrumentalized, tamed, and controlled. A royal consciousness has been created. God instrumentalized to justify and bless absolute power, domination, and exploitation, and silence of all criticism. But the Deuteronomists, Amos, Jeremiah, and the prophetic consciousness will not be silenced. Solomon's great temple and his great liturgy and prayer, his great instrumentalization of God, will not fool or silence the Deuteronomists, Amos, Jeremiah, and the prophetic consciousness. The second case study is Amos. Exceptionalism is not exceptional. The Deuteronomists and the prophets are not in the business of taking us into the heavens in search of the sacred. Later in history, when church and state got married, the church got caught up in the next world and developed another worldly theology. Salvation was about life after death. The prophetic consciousness knows nothing of that. If there was a liberating sacred presence anywhere, the sacred was down to earth in the structures of our social life. The royal consciousness developed a strong sense of exceptionalism, a sense of being chosen to the exclusion of everyone else, privileged, special, and exceptional. And we see this exceptionalism in strands of the Hebrew Bible, in the Christian Testament, in the narrative of the United States, and it is still alive in the United Kingdom, the nostalgia around empire and the Brexit mindset. A lot of nations and former empires still think they are exceptional. God is on our side, or has blessed us above all others. Amos launched into a litany. Chapter 2 of Amos launched into a litany of neighboring crimes against humanity and announced judgment on such crimes. The people of the northern kingdom of Israel feel good about themselves. They are exceptional people, and God's people behave differently. Amos then shatters the exceptionalism. Society is rife with injustices, especially economic injustices of a wealthy, powerful elite, a chasm between rich and poor, gross inequalities, and structural, judicial, and economic injustice. Here too, says the prophet, are violent and inhumane crimes against your own people. Are you really exceptional over against these neighboring people? Then Amos really punctures the moral superiority to everyone else, that sense of privilege and the exceptionalism. In Amos 9 and verse 7, exceptionalism is not exceptional. God has liberated them from the brickworks of Pharaoh, from oppressiveness and exploitation, but God is also on the side of the Ethiopians. And God has liberated the hated Philistines and the Arameans. There is no exceptionalism. Israel's claim of exceptionalism has been de-absolutized. Whoever God is, they and no others have a monopoly on the sacred, on the liberating sacred. God does exodus in the plural. Chosenness or specialness is universal. The prophets and the prophetic consciousness are universalist. Empires, political or economic, nations, elites, and religious institutions can and do perish on exceptionalism. The third case study is the Decalogue. No other gods before me, and not in my name. Reinhold Niebuhr was a German-American theologian of the middle part of the 20th century. He spoke of great disproportions of power that lead to injustice. And government, if its pretensions are not checked, generate imperial impulses of its own towards the community. It would be tempted to destroy the vitality and freedom of component elements in the community in the name of order. This, he says, is the sin of idolatry and pretension in which all government is potentially involved. So every form of government is open to the sin of idolatry and pretension, and every society needs its prophets and the presence of prophetic consciousness to be ever alert to abuses of power, God-making in the name of order over against freedoms, and when government implies religious majesty in relation to the state. So prophetic consciousness is critical consciousness. I suppose the Big Ten are out of fashion today. These are the 10 words which Moses, according to the narrative, wrote down from the thick mist and cloud of Mount Sinai. Well, we need not read stories literally. I suppose the trouble is scientism has made us all literal people. Religious people read the Bible literally, and equally problematic critics of religion also seem to read the Bible literally. We may not recite the 10 Commandments any longer in our churches, but there is something critical in them in relation to idolatry. Walter Brueggemann has put it this way: they are counter commands to the commands of Pharaoh. They are counter commands to the immutability of the Medes and Persians. They are counter commands to every effort at totalizing, including the totalism of anti-neighborly economics in our own time, and totalizing orthodoxies that know too much of wounding truth. No other gods before me, and not taking the name of the Lord in vain. Well, let's not read literally or see behind these commands an insecure, jealous lover who wants to control the partner. The Big Ten are to be read in the context of Exodus and the freedom of liberation from economic and political oppression of imperial Pharaoh. These people have come out of Egypt or been liberated from imperial power and its pretensions to divinity or absoluteness. In no other gods before me, God is a critical principle, de-absolutizing every other claimant to ultimate power. And not taking the name of God in vain has nothing to do with using God as a swear word. Whatever we mean or think we mean by God, we are talking about an imageless quality, something or someone, and we are now struggling with words, who cannot be imaged in finite human language or expressions. Even our symbols are finite and inadequate. Not using the name of God in vain is not instrumentalizing God to legitimize or bless our political or economic or imperial systems. Not taking the name of God in vain is precisely what Solomon ignored. He and many after have used and abused the name or character of God or being of God to sanction and support their oppressive and violent systems. And the prohibition of images is an assertion of the unfettered character of Yahweh, who will not be captured, contained, assigned, or managed by anyone or anything for any purpose. So public theology is in the stream of prophetic consciousness. It seeks to be alert critically to the seduction of idolatry, the propensity to engage in God-making, not only as political, nationalistic, economic, and cultural gods, but also the religious gods. Religious nationalism is to be exposed to and by prophetic consciousness. Okay, let's see what we make of some of that. What did we make of Solomon's instrumentalization of religion? Do we still recognize that at work in our world? And I suppose a question, hopefully we can at least look at before the end, how can we develop and sustain a prophetic consciousness